Waking up in a stranger's bed with a blinding headache is a universal mistake. Waking up in a fortified Chicago mansion, wearing a flawless 10-carat diamond on your left hand, while a ruthless syndicate boss pours you coffee and whispers, "Good morning, my beautiful wife." That is a waking nightmare. Penelope Gallagher, a plus-sized bakery owner who preferred oversized sweaters over Italian silk, had absolutely no memory of saying "I do." But her terrifying descent into the underworld had already begun. Consciousness returned to Penelope Gallagher, not with a gentle dawn, but with the brutal throbbing tempo of a snare drum inside her skull. She groaned, dragging a heavy arm across her face, expecting the familiar scratch of her cheap cotton sheets and the distant wail of police sirens from her cramped apartment in Logan Square. Instead, her skin met the glacial, decadent slip of pure mulberry silk. She froze. The air in the room smelled impossibly expensive, a rich blend of cedarwood, old leather, and a faint masculine trace of bergamot. Penelope forced her eyes open. The ceiling above her was vaulted and painted with a Renaissance-style fresco, framed by intricate gold leaf molding. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of her hangover. She bolted upright, the sudden movement sending a wave of nausea crashing through her. As she gripped the edge of the mattress to steady herself, a heavy, cold weight slipped down her ring finger, catching the morning sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Penelope stared at her left hand. Resting on her plump, soft finger was a diamond so massive, so absurdly flawless, it looked like a prop from a heist movie. The platinum band was warm against her skin. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She looked down at herself. She was not wearing the oversized, flour-dusted college t-shirt she had fallen asleep in. Instead, she was draped in a midnight blue silk nightgown. What chilled her to the bone was not just the garment itself, but how it fit. Penelope was a big woman. She carried her weight in a soft, plush stomach, wide hips, and thick, generous thighs. Buying clothes was usually a frustrating chore, yet this delicate designer silk hugged her ample curves perfectly, tailored exactly to her large frame. Someone knew her precise measurements. "I see you're finally awake." The voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. Penelope whipped her head toward the sound. Standing in the shadows near a colossal mahogany door was a man. He stepped into the light, and Penelope's breath caught in her throat. He was tall, built like a heavyweight fighter, forced into a bespoke three-piece charcoal suit. Jet black hair was swept back from a sharp, aristocratic face, but his beauty was ruined, or perhaps enhanced, by a thin, jagged scar that sliced through his left eyebrow and ended at his cheekbone. His eyes, a chilling, piercing shade of pale gray, were locked entirely on her. She recognized him. Anyone in Chicago who paid attention to the whispers on the street or the redacted names in the city's corruption trials knew that face. Dominic Castelli, the head of the Castelli syndicate. A man who allegedly controlled the docks, the unions, and the underground casinos with an iron, blood-soaked fist. "Where am I?" Penelope demanded, clutching the silk sheets to her full chest, trying to ignore the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "How did I get here? If you're looking for ransom, you've got the wrong girl. I own a failing bakery and owe 30 grand in student loans." Dominic walked toward the bed with the slow, predatory grace of a panther. He carried a silver tray, holding an espresso cup and a glass of water. He set it on the nightstand next to her. "Drink the water. You were heavily sedated," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm. "Sedated?" Penelope echoed, her voice rising in pitch. "You kidnapped me. I'm calling the police." "The police work for me, Penelope," Dominic replied, slipping his hands into his trouser pockets. "And I did not kidnap you. I brought you home. A husband has the right to bring his bride to their estate after the wedding." Penelope stared at him, the silence stretching so taut it felt like it might snap and take her head off. She looked down at the massive diamond, then back up at the ruthless Mafia boss. "A husband," she repeated, her brain struggling to process the syllables. "My husband?" "Correct. I don't know you. I have never spoken to you in my entire life. I went to sleep in my apartment after eating half a pizza, and now I'm in a mob boss's bedroom, wearing the GDP of a small country on my hand. I am not your wife." Dominic leaned over, planting one large, scarred hand on the mattress right next to her hip. He was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from his broad chest, could smell the dangerous, intoxicating scent of him. His pale eyes dropped briefly to the soft swell of her cleavage before meeting her gaze again. "You signed the marriage certificate at 2 a.m., right before you passed out," Dominic stated smoothly. "Father Thomas officiated it. The mayor signed as a witness. Legally, spiritually, and undeniably, you are Penelope Castelli, and you will never return to that crumbling apartment again." "Why?" Penelope choked out, refusing to shrink back despite the terror gripping her. She was a woman who took up space, and she refused to make herself small now, squaring her rounded shoulders. "Why me? Look at me. I'm a civilian. I bake sourdough." "I'm perfect," Dominic interrupted softly, his gaze dropping to the curve of her thick thighs, outlined beneath the silk. "You are exactly what I require." He straightened up, buttoning his suit jacket. "A maid will be in shortly to help you dress. We have a meeting in the dining room in 1 hour. Do not attempt to leave the room until she arrives. The security dogs on this floor are not trained to recognize your scent yet, and I would hate for my new wife to be torn apart on her first morning home." With that, Dominic turned and walked out of the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, leaving Penelope alone in the gilded cage. True to Dominic's terrifying warning, exactly 10 minutes later, the mahogany door clicked open. A petite, older woman in a pristine black and white uniform bustled into the room, followed closely by a towering man built like a brick wall, wearing a tailored earpiece and a dark suit. "Good morning, Signora Castelli," the older woman said, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. "I am Maria. This is Dante. He is your personal shadow." "My what?" Penelope asked, swinging her heavy legs over the edge of the mattress. The floor was heated marble. "Your bodyguard, ma'am," Dante grunted, crossing his massive arms. He positioned himself by the door, staring straight ahead like a gargoyle. Penelope stood up, her bare feet planting firmly on the stone. "Maria, please, you have to help me. I don't belong here. Where are my clothes? The sweatpants I was wearing?" Maria offered a sympathetic but tight-lipped smile. "Those garments were disposed of, Signora. The boss instructed me to prepare your wardrobe. Please come to the dressing room. He does not like to be kept waiting." Realizing she was not going to get any help from the staff, Penelope followed Maria through a set of frosted glass doors into a walk-in closet the size of her entire bakery. Her jaw dropped. The racks were filled with hundreds of garments, dresses, blouses, trousers, coats, and lingerie. Every single piece was from high-end designers: Gucci, Prada, Valentino. But it wasn't the brands that sent a fresh wave of panic through Penelope's veins. It was the sizes. She pulled a heavy, emerald green wool dress off a velvet hanger. It was a size 18. She checked a pair of silk trousers. Size 20. She opened a drawer filled with lace lingerie, finding her exact, difficult-to-source bra size on the tags. "He's a psychopath," Penelope whispered, her hands trembling as she dropped the dress. "He's been watching me." "For how long?" "The boss is a very thorough man," Maria said quietly, handing Penelope a soft black cashmere wrap dress. "Please, Signora, put this on. It is dangerous to anger him." Swallowing her fear, Penelope dressed. The cashmere glided over her plus-sized figure, clinging to her wide hips and accentuating her heavy bust in a way that made her feel both powerful and terribly exposed. She left her thick, dark curls loose, refusing to let Maria style her hair. If she was going to be forced to sit at a Mafia Don's table, she was going to do it looking like herself. Dante escorted her out of the bedroom, leading her down a sprawling, sweeping staircase adorned with a massive crystal chandelier. The mansion was a fortress of luxury. Armed men in dark suits stood at every entrance, their eyes flickering to Penelope before respectfully looking away. They reached the formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a 20-foot mahogany table. Dominic was seated at the head, nursing a glass of amber liquid. To his right stood a man who looked like he had been carved out of pure malice. He was leaner than Dominic, with slicked-back hair and a sharp, cruel face. "Ah, the blushing bride," the lean man sneered as Penelope entered. He looked her up and down, his lip curling in obvious disgust as his eyes raked over her soft belly and thick thighs. "Tell me, Dom, when you said you were invoking the protection clause, I assumed you'd pick a Russian model, or maybe an heiress. Not a bakery girl who looks like she eats half her own inventory." Dante stiffened behind Penelope, but it was Dominic's reaction that stopped the air in the room. Dominic didn't yell. He didn't stand up. He simply placed his crystal glass on the table with a sharp clack. "Matteo," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, deadly register that made the hairs on the back of Penelope's neck stand up. "If you ever speak about my wife with disrespect again, I will remove your tongue with a dull steak knife and feed it to the hounds. Do you understand me?" Matteo Russo, the fearsome underboss of the Castelli family, visibly paled. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Apologies, boss. Apologies, Signora Castelli." Dominic's cold eyes snapped to Penelope, instantly softening a fraction of a degree. He stood up and pulled out the chair to his immediate left. "Sit, Penelope. You must be hungry." She wanted to refuse, to scream, to flip the table. But the smell of roasted garlic, fresh focaccia, and seared meats suddenly hit her, and her stomach gave a loud, traitorous rumble. Penelope flushed hotly. "I am a hostage," she said firmly, though she walked forward and took the seat. "Hostages don't eat brunch." "You are my wife," Dominic corrected, signaling a waiter who immediately placed a plate of rich, truffle-laced pasta in front of her. "Eat. You need your strength." Penelope picked up a silver fork. "Why? Are you going to make me dig my own grave?" Dominic actually smiled, a dark, dangerous smirk that made his scar stretch. "No, mia cara. I am going to keep you alive. Because as of midnight last night, Lorenzo Moretti put a $3 million bounty on your head." The fork slipped from Penelope's thick fingers, clattering loudly against the fine china. A bounty? On me? I bake bread. The most dangerous thing I do is leave the oven on too long. Eat, Dominic ordered softly, and I will tell you exactly how your dead father sold your life to the cartel. The dining room suddenly felt devoid of oxygen. Penelope stared at the steaming bowl of pasta, her appetite vanishing, replaced by a cold, leaden weight in her stomach. My father, she choked out. Arthur Gallagher was a degenerate gambler. He died 3 years ago of a heart attack in a seedy motel in Gary, Indiana. He had nothing to do with cartels or syndicates. Matteo scoffed from his corner, crossing his arms, though he kept his gaze averted from Dominic's lethal stare. That's what the police report said. It's cute you believe it. Dominic raised a hand, silencing his underboss instantly. He leaned toward Penelope, his massive frame dominating her peripheral vision. Your father was a bookie, Penelope, but he didn't just take bets on horses. He laundered money. Specifically, he laundered money for the Moretti family, our biggest rivals in this city. 3 years ago, $3 million of Lorenzo Moretti's cash went missing. Your father didn't die of a heart attack. Moretti's men beat him to death trying to find the money. Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. No, I identified his body. The coroner said, "The coroner is on Moretti's payroll," Dominic stated, cutting a piece of his steak with surgical precision. They tortured your father, but he never gave up the location of the money. Under the old laws of the commission, a blood debt doesn't die with the debtor. It passes to the next of kin. Me, Penelope whispered, the horrific reality crashing down on her. You, Dominic confirmed. Moretti has spent 3 years looking for you. Your father was smart enough to keep you entirely separated from his life. He legally changed your last name to your mother's maiden name when you were a child. But yesterday, one of Moretti's hackers finally found a link. An old tax record. The moment they identified you, they dispatched a hit squad to your apartment. Penelope's chest heaved. She looked down at her plush body, her soft hands trembling. She wasn't an action hero. She couldn't fight off cartel hitmen. So, why am I here? She asked, her voice cracking. If I have a target on my back, why didn't you just let them take me? Why marry me? Dominic's pale grey eyes locked onto hers, burning with an intensity that made Penelope want to look away. Because of the syndicate's lex familia, family law. A blood debt cannot be collected from a made man's wife without starting a full-scale war. By marrying you, I placed you under the absolute protection of the Castelli family. Moretti cannot touch you now without breaking a century-old treaty. I saved your life. How noble of you, she shot back, a flash of defensive anger cutting through her terror. And what do you get out of this, Mr. Castelli? You expect me to believe the most ruthless boss in Chicago married a fat, broke baker just out of the goodness of his heart. What's the catch? Matteo shifted uncomfortably in the corner. You should watch your tone, Baker. Let her speak, Dominic commanded. He turned his full, undivided attention to Penelope. His gaze dropped slowly from her fiery, defiant eyes, lingering on her full lips, the soft curve of her neck, and the heavy swell of her breasts beneath the cashmere. There was a raw, primal hunger in his look that made Penelope's core tighten. There is no catch, Penelope, Dominic said softly. But there is a detail you are overlooking. Which is? The timeline, Dominic said, reaching into his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound dossier and tossed it onto the table in front of her. Penelope opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were hundreds of photographs. There was a picture of her wiping down the counter at her bakery, a picture of her carrying groceries, a picture of her laughing with a customer, wearing her favorite oversized sweater, surveillance logs detailing her exact daily routine, her favorite coffee orders, the exact dimensions of her clothing, all dating back over 14 months. "Moretti found you yesterday," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dark, velvet whisper. "I found you over a year ago." Penelope stared at the photos in horror. You've been stalking me." "I have been watching you," Dominic corrected, unapologetic. "When I discovered who you were, I intended to use you as leverage against Moretti. I went to your bakery 14 months ago to assess the asset." Penelope searched her memory. A tall, brooding man in a suit, ordering a simple black coffee, watching her intensely from the corner booth while she kneaded dough. She had thought he was just a creepy businessman. "But then I kept watching," Dominic continued, leaning closer until she could feel his breath on her cheek. "I watched you work until your hands bled to keep that bakery open. I watched you refuse to let the local gang extort you for protection money, threatening a street thug with a rolling pin. I saw your fire. I saw your beauty." He reached out, his calloused, scarred fingers lightly tracing the soft, plush curve of her jawline. Penelope shivered, frozen in place. "I didn't marry you just to save you from Moretti, Penelope," Dominic whispered, his eyes flashing with a possessive darkness. "I married you because you belong to me, and I protect what is mine." Before Penelope could process the terrifying weight of his confession, the heavy dining room doors violently burst open. "Boss!" It was one of the perimeter guards, bleeding from a deep gash on his forehead, his submachine gun slung across his chest. "Moretti's men," the guard gasped, clutching the doorframe. "They didn't care about the treaty. They just blew the front gates. We're under attack." The sound of shattering glass and heavy automatic gunfire suddenly echoed through the grand halls of the mansion. Matteo immediately drew a heavy pistol from his shoulder holster, kicking the dining room table over for cover. "Get down!" Dominic roared. He didn't wait for Penelope to move. With terrifying speed, Dominic grabbed her, his massive arms wrapping around her thick waist, hauling her heavy frame out of her chair as if she weighed nothing. He threw them both to the marble floor, just as the bay windows of the dining room exploded inward, showering the room in a deadly rain of glass and bullets. Dominic covered her entirely with his body, pressing her soft curves into the hard, cold stone, his gun already drawn and firing toward the breach. Penelope squeezed her eyes shut, screaming over the deafening roar of gunfire, realizing with absolute certainty that her old life was dead. She was now a pawn in a deadly Mafia war, chained to a monster who was obsessed with her. Bullets tore through the mahogany dining room doors, shredding the expensive wood into lethal splinters that rained down like shrapnel. Penelope screamed, instinctively burying her face into the crook of Dominic's neck as his massive body shielded her completely. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire vibrated through the heated marble floor beneath her heavy thighs. The stench of cordite and pulverized plaster instantly overpowered the rich aroma of truffle pasta and roasted garlic. Dominic did not flinch. His left arm remained locked around Penelope's thick waist like an iron vice, pressing her soft curves into the floor, while his right hand smoothly drew a sleek, matte black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. He returned fire with terrifying, mechanical precision. Beside them, Matteo had flipped the heavy dining table, using the thick wood as a barricade while he unloaded a custom silver Beretta toward the breached entryway. "Dante!" Dominic roared over the cacophony of shattering crystal and screaming men. "Secure the west corridor! We move to the subterranean garage now!" "Copy that, boss." Dante's gruff voice echoed from the hallway, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of a shotgun clearing the path. Dominic shifted his weight, his pale grey eyes snapping down to Penelope. She was trembling violently, her wide eyes blown dark with terror, the emerald green cashmere wrap dress smeared with white plaster dust. He cupped her jaw with free hand, his thumb stroking the soft, plush flesh of her cheek. "Look at me," Dominic commanded, his voice a low, steady anchor in the middle of a war zone. "Penelope, look at me." She forced her eyes to meet his. "I am going to stand up, and I am going to pull you with me," he said, his tone devoid of panic. "You will not let go of my hand. You will run exactly when I tell you to run, and you will not look back. Do you understand?" Penelope couldn't find her voice, so she gave a frantic, jerky nod. The 10-carat diamond on her left hand felt unbearably heavy, catching the chaotic flashes of muzzle fire. "On 3, Dominic said, shifting into a crouch. 1, 2, 3, move!" I hauled her up. Despite her substantial weight, Dominic pulled Penelope to her feet as effortlessly as if she were made of air. His grip on her hand was bruising, an unbreakable tether dragging her through the nightmare. They sprinted toward the rear servants' corridor. Penelope's bare feet slapped against the marble, her heavy breasts heaving, her lungs burning as adrenaline flooded her system. She was a baker, a woman who spent her days kneading dough and arranging pastries on Rush Street, not dodging cartel assassins. A man dressed in tactical black stepped out from behind a marble pillar, raising an assault rifle directly at Penelope. Time seemed to slow. Penelope saw the dead, hollow look in the hit man's eyes. Before the man could pull the trigger, Dominic stepped smoothly in front of her, absorbing the line of fire, and fired 2 rounds point blank into the assailant's chest, followed by a third to the head. The man collapsed in a spray of crimson. Penelope gagged, stumbling backward, but Dominic's relentless grip kept her moving, stepping over the bleeding corpse without breaking his stride. "Keep moving!" Matteo yelled from behind them, providing covering fire as more of Moretti's men flooded the dining room. They burst through a set of reinforced steel doors and descended a narrow, concrete stairwell. Penelope was gasping for air, sweat beading on her forehead, her thick thighs chafing under the silk and cashmere, as she struggled to maintain Dominic's grueling pace. He noticed her faltering. Without a word, he holstered his weapon, swept his arms under her knees and behind her back, and lifted her entirely off the ground. "Dominic, I'm too heavy," she gasped, mortified and terrified all at once. "You are exactly as you should be," he grunted, holding her flush against his broad chest as he took the stairs 2 at a time. "And I am not leaving my wife to be slaughtered." They reached the bottom of the stairwell, bursting into a sprawling, climate-controlled underground garage filled with luxury vehicles. Dante was already behind the wheel of a massive armored black Cadillac Escalade, the engine roaring like a caged beast. Dominic threw the passenger door open, practically shoving Penelope into the back seat before diving in behind her. Matteo vaulted into the front passenger seat, slamming the door shut just as the stairwell door blew open behind them. Bullets sparked against the Escalade's bulletproof glass, leaving spiderweb cracks, but failing to penetrate the thick armor. "Drive!" Dominic barked. Dante slammed his foot on the gas. The heavy SUV launched forward, smashing through the reinforced garage doors and tearing out onto the winding private driveway of the Castelli estate. Penelope curled into a ball on the leather seat, burying her face in her knees as the SUV careened wildly. The sirens of the estate's security system wailed into the morning air. They tore onto Lakeshore Drive, the massive vehicle weaving violently through the morning Chicago traffic. Penelope peeked over her knees, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Looking out the reinforced window, she saw the icy, churning waters of Lake Michigan, blurring past them, a stark contrast to the blood and fire they had just left behind. "Did we lose them?" Matteo demanded, checking the side mirrors, his sharp face pale and slick with sweat. "Moretti's primary squad is dead or contained by the estate guards," Dante rumbled from the driver's seat, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. "But they'll have spotters on the expressways. We need to get to the Wacker Drive safe house." Dominic ignored his men. He turned to Penelope, who was pressed as far away from him as the spacious back seat allowed. She was hyperventilating, her plush chest rising and falling in rapid, jagged intervals. Her dark curls were a wild, tangled mess, and there was a smear of someone else's blood on the hem of her designer dress. Slowly, Dominic reached out. Penelope flinched, pulling her knees tighter to her chest. "Do not shrink away from me," Dominic said, his voice dropping to that hypnotic, dangerous velvet register. He didn't force his touch on her, leaving his large, scarred hand resting on the leather seat inches from her thigh. "You are safe, Penelope. I gave you my word. No one will touch you." "A man died," she whispered, her voice cracking, tears finally spilling over her thick lashes. "You shot a man in the face right in front of me." "I killed a threat to my family," Dominic corrected coldly. "Lorenzo Moretti sent those men to put a bullet in your skull to settle a 3-year-old grudge. I did what was necessary." "This isn't my life!" Penelope screamed, her terror finally boiling over into raw, unadulterated fury. She slammed her heavy hands against the leather seat. "I don't belong in armored cars. I don't belong in mansions with bulletproof glass. I belong in my bakery on Rush Street, covered in flour, worrying about yeast and rent. You stole my life, Dominic." "Stole." Dominic's jaw tightened, the jagged scar running through his eyebrow pulling taut. He leaned closer, invading her space until she could smell the gunpowder and bergamot radiating from his skin. "Your old life died the moment Moretti's hacker found your tax records," Dominic said ruthlessly, refusing to coddle her. "If I had left you in that bakery, you would be dead right now, Penelope. Your body would be rotting in an oil drum at the bottom of the Chicago River. I did not steal your life. I preserved it. And in exchange, you wear my ring. You bear my name. You are mine to protect." Penelope stared at the massive diamond on her finger, the reality of her gilded cage locking firmly into place. She wasn't just a hostage. She was a possession, a highly guarded, fiercely protected obsession of a man who ruled the city's underworld. And the terrifying part was the dark, entirely inappropriate thrill that shivered down her spine at his possessive words. The safe house was not a dingy basement, but a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse occupying the entire top floor of a sleek glass skyscraper near Wacker Drive. The private elevator doors opened directly into a living room bordered by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. As soon as they entered, Dante and Matteo fanned out, securing the perimeter, checking the biometric locks, and drawing the heavy blackout shades over the massive windows. Penelope stood frozen in the center of the room, her heavy legs feeling like lead. The adrenaline was rapidly crashing, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a hollow, aching numbness. She looked down at her hands, still trembling. The platinum band of her wedding ring feeling like a shackle. Dominic shrugged off his ruined suit jacket, tossing it onto a pristine white leather sofa. His white dress shirt was stained with soot and blood. He walked over to a wet bar, poured a generous measure of Macallan 18 into a crystal glass, and carried it over to Penelope. "Drink," he commanded softly, pressing the heavy glass into her cold fingers. She took a hesitant sip. The expensive scotch burned a fiery trail down her throat, settling warmly in her stomach and helping to quiet the violent shaking of her hands. "What happens now?" Penelope asked, her voice hollow. She looked up at him, her large, expressive brown eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I can't live like this, Dominic, looking over my shoulder every second, waiting for the next hit squad to come through the window." Dominic stepped closer, taking the half-empty glass from her hands and setting it on a nearby glass table. He reached out, his calloused thumbs gently wiping away the plaster dust from her soft, full cheeks. The tenderness of his touch was entirely at odds with the violent killer she had witnessed just an hour ago. "You will not have to live looking over your shoulder," Dominic vowed, his pale eyes burning with a dark, lethal promise. "Because Lorenzo Moretti will not live to see the end of this week. I am going to tear his syndicate apart, piece by piece, until there is nothing left but ash. I am going to erase the threat to you entirely." "And then what?" Penelope challenged, her chin jutting out defensively. "Once Moretti is dead, the blood debt dies with him. Do you let me go? Do I get an annulment and go back to baking?" Dominic's hands slid from her cheeks, down to her thick, soft neck, his thumbs resting over her pulse point. He felt the rapid, fluttering beat of her heart against his skin. His eyes darkened, a possessive, territorial shadow crossing his sharp features. "No," Dominic whispered, leaning down until his lips were mere inches from hers. "You are my wife before God and the syndicate, Penelope. Death is the only exit from this marriage. You will remain by my side. You will rule this city with me. You are a Castelli now." Before Penelope could argue, before she could push back against the suffocating weight of his obsession, Matteo burst into the living room, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. His cruel face was unusually grim. "Boss," Matteo said, his voice tense, "we have a problem." Dominic didn't step away from Penelope, keeping one hand possessively on her waist as he turned his head. "Report." "Moretti's men," Matteo said, swallowing hard. He glanced briefly at Penelope before looking back at Dominic. When they realized the hit squad failed at the estate, they pivoted. They went after the secondary target to send a message. Penelope's blood ran cold. "Secondary target? What are you talking about? I don't have any family left. I don't have anyone." Matteo walked over, turning his phone screen around to show them a live news broadcast from a local Chicago station. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking. Massive explosion rocks Rush Street." Penelope gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. On the screen, surrounded by fire trucks and police barricades, was a towering inferno. Thick black smoke billowed into the morning sky. But Penelope didn't need the news anchor's commentary to recognize the building. It was the quaint brick storefront she had spent every waking hour in for the past 5 years. Her bakery, her sanctuary, the place where she created, where she felt safe, where she earned her own meager but honest living. It was gone, reduced to a hollowed-out, burning shell. "They firebombed the bakery," Matteo said quietly. "Nobody was inside. But the building is a total loss." Penelope's knees buckled. The sheer weight of the loss hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed, but she didn't hit the floor. Dominic caught her, dragging her heavy, sobbing frame against his chest. He sank to his knees with her, wrapping his massive arms securely around her shaking body as she buried her face in his ruined shirt, sobbing uncontrollably. Everything she had built, every ounce of independence she had clawed out of the world, had been incinerated in an instant because of a father she despised and a Mafia war she wanted no part of. She was completely, utterly unmoored. She had no home, no business, no old clothes, no past. She had nothing left in the world except the dangerous monster holding her on the floor. Dominic stroked her tangled dark hair, pressing his lips to the crown of her head. He looked up at Matteo, his pale eyes completely devoid of humanity, cold and dead as a winter grave. "Assemble the capos," Dominic ordered, his voice echoing in the quiet penthouse like a death knell. "Open the armories. Call in the debt from the Irish in South Boston." Matteo nodded slowly. "We're going to war. We are going to slaughter," Dominic corrected softly, his gaze dropping back to the sobbing woman in his arms. He tightened his grip on Penelope, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of vanilla and fear that clung to her skin. "Listen to me, mia cara," Dominic whispered in her ear, his voice rough with violent devotion. "They burned your sanctuary, but I swear to you on my life, I will buy you 100 bakeries. I will build you an empire of sugar and flour, if that is what you desire. But first, I am going to bring you Lorenzo Moretti's head on a silver platter. You belong to me now, Penelope, and no one takes from me without bleeding for it." Penelope clung to his broad shoulders, her tears soaking his shirt. The sickening realization washed over her, chilling her to the bone despite the heat radiating from his body. She was trapped. She could not fight the syndicate. She could not outrun Moretti. And she could certainly not escape Dominic Castelli's terrifying, all-consuming obsession. If she wanted to survive, if she wanted vengeance for the life that had been stolen from her, she had to stop acting like a frightened baker. She had to become exactly what Dominic claimed she was. She had to become the mob boss's wife, grief transformed into something cold and sharp over the next 48 hours. The woman who had wept on the floor of the Wacker Drive penthouse died alongside the smoldering ruins of her bakery. In her place, a chilling, terrifying calm settled over Penelope. She spent 2 days pacing the glass-walled living room, watching the Chicago skyline with deadened eyes while Dominic's syndicate mobilized for an all-out war. She did not cry again. She did not ask to leave. On the 3rd night, Penelope walked into the penthouse study. The room was bathed in the dim, golden glow of a single desk lamp. Dominic sat behind a massive oak desk, cleaning a disassembled Sig Sauer pistol with methodical precision. He looked up as she entered. She wore a form-fitting black silk slip dress that hugged every curve of her heavy hips and full thighs. It was a dramatic departure from her usual modest attire, but Penelope was done hiding. She walked forward, the heavy 10-carat diamond catching the light, and placed both of her soft, plush hands flat on his desk. "Teach me how to shoot," she demanded, her voice steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued her since she woke up in his bed. Dominic's hands stilled over the weapon parts. His pale grey eyes flicked up to her face, assessing the hard line of her jaw and the dark, unyielding fire in her brown eyes. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips, pulling at his jagged scar. "My men will protect you, Penelope. I will protect you. You do not need to dirty your hands. Lorenzo Moretti didn't care about your protection when he firebombed my livelihood," she replied coldly. "I am a target. I am the wife of a Mafia boss. If I am going to serve in your world, Dominic, I refuse to be a liability. I refuse to cower in the back of an armored car while men fight my battles. Teach me." Dominic stood up slowly. He walked around the desk, his massive frame towering over her. He stopped inches away, the heat of his body radiating against her silk-clad curves. He reached out, his calloused fingers tracing the soft slope of her shoulder, down her thick arm, until his hand swallowed hers. He pulled her toward a reinforced shooting lane concealed behind a false bookshelf at the back of the study. The soundproofed room smelled of lead and gunpowder. Dominic handed her a matte black Glock 19, the same model he had used in the mansion. The metal was cold and heavy in her palm. "Stand with your feet shoulder-width apart," Dominic instructed softly, stepping behind her. I didn't just tell her. He molded her into the correct posture. His large hands gripped her thick waist, positioning her hips. He pressed his broad chest against her back, his chin resting near her temple as he guided her arms up. The sheer physical dominance of his proximity sent a traitorous, heated shiver down Penelope's spine. He was a monster, a killer, but the dark, consuming devotion he directed entirely at her was intoxicating. "Keep both eyes open," Dominic whispered, his breath fanning across her neck. "Align the front sight with the rear notch. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull. Squeeze." Penelope focused on the paper target 20 yards away. She pictured the smoking crater of her bakery. She pictured the terrified face of her father in his final moments. She took a deep breath, letting the anger crystallize in her veins, and squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked violently in her hands, the explosive sound vibrating in her chest. A hole appeared in the outer ring of the target's chest. "Again," Dominic commanded, his grip on her waist tightening approvingly. She fired again, and again. With every shot, the recoil felt less like a shock and more like a release. She emptied the magazine, leaving a clustered, jagged hole in the center mass of the paper silhouette. Dominic hit the button to reel the target in. He looked at the bullet holes, then down at Penelope. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wild and bright with a newfound, dangerous adrenaline. He reached out, taking the empty gun from her trembling fingers and setting it on the bench. "You are magnificent," he murmured, his voice thick with raw, unrestrained obsession. He cupped her jaw, tilting her face up. "I knew the moment I saw you kneading dough in that kitchen that you were meant for more than a civilian life. You have fire in your blood, mia cara." He kissed her. It was not a gentle, testing kiss. It was bruising, possessive, and entirely consuming. Penelope gasped against his lips, her hands instinctively coming up to grip the lapels of his shirt. For the first time, she kissed him back, pouring all of her grief, her rage, and her twisted, blossoming desire into the brutal embrace. The heavy doors of the study burst open, breaking them apart. Matteo froze in the doorway, averting his eyes out of self-preservation. "Boss," Matteo said tightly. "We found him. Moretti is holding a sit-down with the Russian buyers at the industrial docks on the south side. He's trying to secure an escape route out of the city." Dominic turned, his eyes instantly shifting from burning desire to glacial murder. "Assemble the strike team. We leave in 10 minutes. "I'm coming with you," Penelope stated, stepping forward. Matteo scoffed. "Signora, this is a wet work operation. It's not a field trip." "I said I am coming," Penelope repeated, her voice laced with the same icy authority Dominic used. She looked directly at her husband. "He burned my life down, Dominic. I want to watch him lose his." Dominic stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He saw the unyielding steel in her posture, the way she carried her plush, imposing figure like a queen, demanding her throne. He nodded once. "Dante will keep you in the armored vehicle in the alley," Dominic agreed. "You will watch, but you will not step out of the car." The south side docks were cloaked in a freezing, impenetrable fog that rolled off the Chicago River. Dante parked the armored Cadillac Escalade in a narrow, trash-strewn alleyway overlooking the loading bays of Warehouse 42. Penelope sat in the back seat, dressed in thick black trousers and a heavy wool coat, her hands gripping the leather seats as she stared through the bulletproof glass. In her coat pocket sat the fully loaded Glock 19. Dominic had not told her to bring it, but she had taken it from the armory anyway. The silence of the night was suddenly shattered by the concussive boom of a breaching charge. Flashbangs lit up the frosted windows of the warehouse in blinding, strobe-like bursts. The unmistakable rattle of automatic gunfire ripped through the air. The Castelli syndicate had arrived. Penelope watched the shadows dancing against the warehouse walls, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She could hear men screaming, the brutal, chaotic symphony of a Mafia war reaching its bloody crescendo. "The boss and Matteo have the main floor locked down," Dante grunted from the front seat, monitoring the encrypted radio chatter. "Moretti's men are dropping fast." Suddenly, the heavy metal side door of the warehouse, located barely 30 feet from their alleyway, kicked violently open. A man stumbled out into the freezing night, clutching a bleeding wound in his shoulder. He wore a ruined, custom-tailored white suit, his face pale and slick with sweat. Penelope's breath caught. It was Lorenzo Moretti. He had slipped through the net. Moretti staggered toward a black sedan parked near the dumpsters, but his eyes caught the gleam of the Escalade's grille in the alleyway. He froze, recognizing the Castelli plates. Drawing a silver revolver with his good hand, Moretti began to limp toward the SUV, raising his weapon to fire at the driver's side windshield. "Gunman!" Dante shouted, drawing his own weapon, but the angle was blocked by the reinforced pillar of the windshield. Penelope didn't think. The civilized, terrified baker, who used to apologize for taking up too much space on the subway, was entirely gone. In her place was a woman forged in blood and fire. She slammed her hand against the electronic control panel, rolling down the thick, bulletproof back window. The freezing air rushed into the cabin. "Signora, no!" Dante yelled, twisting in his seat. Penelope ignored him. She leaned out of the open window, raising the heavy Glock 19 with both hands, exactly as Dominic had taught her. She leveled the sight squarely on the chest of the man who had ordered her father's death, the man who had burned her sanctuary to ash. Moretti stopped, his eyes widening as he saw the plush, imposing figure of the woman he had hunted, aiming a gun directly at him. He swung his revolver toward her. "For my bakery, you son of a bitch," Penelope whispered. She squeezed the trigger. Bang. 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 3 shots echoed into the foggy night. The recoil slammed up her arms, but her grip held firm. Moretti's body jerked violently backward as all 3 rounds struck his center mass. His revolver fired a wild shot into the brick wall above the SUV before slipping from his fingers. He collapsed onto the cold, wet concrete, his blood pooling rapidly, staining his white suit crimson. He gasped once, his eyes staring blankly into the fog, and then stopped moving entirely. Penelope lowered the smoking gun, her chest heaving. The silence that followed the gunfire was deafening. She stared at the dead body, expecting a wave of guilt or nausea to overtake her. Instead, a deep, profound sense of peace settled over her. The ghost of her father was finally buried. The threat was eliminated. She had taken her power back. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. Dominic emerged from the warehouse side door, an assault rifle slung across his chest, his face splattered with blood. Matteo was 2 steps behind him. Dominic stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Moretti's lifeless body on the ground, the neat cluster of bullet holes in his chest. Then he looked up at the Escalade. Penelope was still leaning out of the window, the Glock resting on the frame, her dark curls whipping in the wind, her chest rising and falling heavily. She met Dominic's gaze, her brown eyes completely devoid of fear. Matteo let out a low whistle, lowering his weapon. "Well, I'll be damned. The baker has teeth." Dominic walked slowly toward the vehicle. He didn't look at his fallen rival. His pale, chilling eyes were locked entirely on his wife. He reached the window, ignoring the smoking gun in her hand, and gently cradled the side of her face. His thumb brushed over the soft, plush curve of her cheek. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "No," Penelope said, her voice steady. "The debt is paid." A dark, terrifyingly proud smile broke across Dominic's scarred face. He leaned in, pressing a fierce, blood-stained kiss to her forehead. The scent of cordite, expensive cologne, and iron filled her senses, anchoring her to him. "Yes," Dominic whispered against her skin. "The debt is paid, and Chicago is ours." He opened the rear door, sliding into the spacious back seat beside her, as Dante rolled the window back up. Dominic pulled her into his lap, not caring about the blood on his clothes, wrapping his massive arms around her thick, soft curves. Penelope rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. She looked down at the massive 10-carat diamond on her left hand. It no longer felt like a shackle. It felt like a crown. She was Penelope Castelli, the undisputed queen of the underworld, and heaven help anyone who dared to challenge her reign. Did Penelope's shocking transformation from a sweet baker to a ruthless mafia queen leave you absolutely speechless? When she pulled that trigger, she didn't just survive. She claimed her throne. If you loved this intense, dark romance, filled with danger, obsession, and a fiercely beautiful plus-sized heroine taking back her power, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends who crave action-packed love stories, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another thrilling tale. Leave a comment below. Would you have pulled the trigger? See you in the next story.